Welcome back everyone to another Psych Reacts video. Today we're looking at the case of Christopher Pittman, the boy who was only 12 years old when he murdered his grandparents. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look.
To properly understand this case and the senseless murder of Joe and Joy Pittman, we have to go back to the 9th of April, 1989, the date of birth of Christopher Frank Pittman, Joe and Joy's grandson. He was born in Florida to a dysfunctional couple. While his mother was negligent, irresponsible, and absent from his life, his father, whose name was also Joe, was going through a rapid series of bad relationships. It was also reported that Chris's father was violent to him when he was a kid, but we will address that as we move forward with the story.
So already we can see a little bit of issues in the childhood. We had a mother that was barely there, and we had a father that was going through bad relationships. Therefore, his focus was probably not on his children, as well as being a violent father. So it's possible that Chris and his sister were going through abuse during their childhood, which can have some very negative effects on children. Now, the grandparents actually took over care of Christopher and took him in as their own. The sister, however, stayed with the dad. Now, the grandfather seemed to be a little bit stern, however, loving towards Chris. Now, let's see how Chris changed after he was taken in by his grandparents.
The change turned out to be the perfect cure for Chris. At first, it was clear to everyone how hurt the young boy was. The Chester community would describe him as a well-mannered but extremely quiet boy. At the Methodist Church, members and even the chaplain noticed how reserved Christopher was, and they did their best to make him feel at home. With time, it worked. Christopher became more expressive, fun, loving, and full of life.
Okay, so apparently bringing Chris to live with his grandparents was a perfect choice. They took him away from all that chaos that he lived with before with his absent mother and his father, who was dealing with a lot of relationship problems. Removing a kid from a situation like that can have a very positive effect on them, as you can see. However, reintroducing them back into that situation can cause a mess and just re-scramble everything that they just made progress on. So what happened when Chris was reintroduced back into his father's life? Let's go ahead and take a look.
Not too long after Chris returned to Florida, his mother disappeared once again. He woke up one morning to find that his mother had left without warning. Around this time, his father was also going through his third divorce, and the pressure became so much that one day, a 12-year-old Chris decided to run away. At home, Chris began to get desperate. He was no longer interested in staying in Florida with either his father or his older sister Danielle. He threw tantrums, and those tantrums soon turned into depressive episodes. Then, one day, things escalated too far when he grabbed a knife and threatened to kill himself in front of Danielle. According to her, he said, "You know, I'd rather die than live in this house with you and Dad."
Once Chris was returned back to his biological parents, the chaos seemed to just swirl around Chris. Once again, the mother had disappeared and the father was still going through divorce. Chris wanted to go back to his grandparents because they offered him stability and love and care that the parents could not. As you can see, returning Chris back to his own home was not the best idea in this situation. For instance, he threatened to kill himself to be returned to his grandparents. This type of behavior can be exhibited in children who do not have a stable home life. Now, it is mentioned that his angry outbursts turned into depressive states. So was it really depression that caused Chris to try and kill himself, or was he just manipulating his parents to get back to his grandparents? However, once returning Chris back to his grandparents, was it too late to send him back? Let's go ahead and take a look.
Chris had already changed. The community that had once nurtured him into a fun, loving, and expressive kid no longer recognized him. Worse still, he had also developed a foul temper. He was getting into fights with anyone and everyone. With classmates, he had an episode where he choked a fellow student on the school bus. In church, things got to a boiling point on the evening of November 28th when Chris started kicking the back of the piano bench, disturbing the pianist and the entire service. Unsurprisingly, his grandparents were outraged, especially his grandfather, Joe.
Alright, so after Chris was returned to his grandparents, he started to show signs of a foul temper. He started causing scenes, hurting children in school, and he started to draw attention to himself through disruptive behavior. This is probably due to the unstable home life that he had with his father and the fact that his mother left him. He probably felt neglected and unwanted by his own mother. Furthermore, his father was dealing with his third divorce. Therefore, it's possible that Chris was not getting the attention he needed, ultimately leading to his threat with the suicide. So now it's time to talk about the murders of Chris's grandparents. How did it happen and was it premeditated? Let's go ahead and take a look.
Chris and his grandparents had to leave church early that day, and when they got home, Chris got a spanking from Joe for his bad behavior. Later that night, the Pittmans, both Joe and Joy, were found with bullet holes in their heads, their house on fire, and 12-year-old Chris Pittman, their grandson, was missing.
So Chris's grandparents were murdered in cold blood and Chris was nowhere to be found. The house was on fire, however, Chris was not inside the building. Turns out the car that the grandparents owned was missing as well. So what was Chris's story on why he was not in the house? Let's go ahead and take a look.
Christopher Frank Pittman was found in his grandparents' truck by 2 deer hunters in the woods some miles away from his grandparents' burnt home. The truck had broken down and Chris told them that he had been kidnapped by a big black man who had shot his grandparents, burnt their house, and kidnapped him. The deer hunters were inclined to believe him, but something was off. The 12-year-old boy was eerily calm. He wasn't behaving like a child who had just gone through that kind of trauma. For a boy as young as him, they expected him to be terrified.
So during this situation, a child this age would be typically very scared. However, Chris remained very calm, which was very unnerving to both the hunters and the police. Now they thought that it was possible he was just undergoing shock, so they kind of just let it go. However, later on the truth was revealed.
It turned out that 12-year-old Chris, armed with a shotgun, had crept into his grandparents' room 4 hours after his grandfather had given him a spanking for his outburst. Chris had shot them 4 times while they were sleeping, killing them instantly. It was him who had set the house on fire. He took the truck, guns, the family dog, and $33 in cash. The 12-year-old had just confessed to premeditated murder, theft, and arson. It was difficult to believe. And what made the situation worse was the fact that Christopher Pittman felt no remorse.
So how does a fun-loving child who just started opening up towards his community turn into this monster of a killer? Now later on in the video, they do mention that Chris was actually on Zoloft, which is an antidepressant. Now before that, when he lived with his father, he was on a different antidepressant right after he went back to his father's house. The psychiatrist that prescribed Zoloft to Chris did not wean him off of the old drug because the other drug was not used in their area. Now first of all, there can be repercussions to put a kid on an antidepressant. That's why when you see antidepressant commercials, there's a lot of warnings saying, oh, you shouldn't be careful about putting people under 18 on these types of drugs. That's because they can change the person's behavior and it can also change the thought process of these children. So switching from one drug to another without being weaned off of the last one can cause withdrawal symptoms, which they believe that Chris went through. Now, defense attorneys tried to state that Zoloft was the reason why he murdered his grandparents, and there's a whole spiel at the end of the video. If you do want to go watch it, I do recommend it. It is very interesting. However, the basic rundown is they're blaming Zoloft. Now, Zoloft is a common drug for those with depression in America. So did this drug really cause the murder of the child's grandparents, or was this premeditated and completely psychopathic? One thing that I do stand by after watching this video is the fact that Zoloft does not make you feel remorseless. It can give you aggressive and violent behaviors and outbursts, however, it's not going to make you remorseless. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you did like and enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like down below. Also let me know your thoughts in the comments as well. Make sure if you haven't already to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. But that's going to do it for this one, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace!